The Psychedelic Report.
Psychedelic drugs
have played their part in America's long, strange trip toward an understanding of mind-altering drugs.
The psychedelic news.
Leading physicians, scientists, and experts share their wisdom about psychedelic medicines and healing.
50 years ago, psychedelic drugs were at the center of America's counterculture.
The brightest minds in psychedelic medicine. The Psychedelic Report.
We use the ketamine-assisted psychotherapy model that happens to have psychedelic effects that were not predicted when the drug was first developed.
From researchers to investors.
I think the biggest mistake we've made as a culture is the war on drugs.
To physicians to shamans and nonprofit pioneers.
Psychedelic drugs.
Recent research suggests some of them could have legitimate uses.
The psychedelic news
Brings you diverse perspectives from the front lines of this exciting movement. The Psychedelic Report.
The Psychedelic Report was brought to you by Apollo Neuroscience and produced by Future Medicine Media. Welcome to the Psychedelic Report, your single source of truth for the psychedelic news. I'm your host, Dr. Dave Rabin. I'm a neuroscientist and psychiatrist trained in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy as well as MDMA-assisted therapy. I have a very special guest today who is kicking off a new series on all the ways that we can access psychedelic states of healing without drugs or medicine. In fact, without putting anything into our bodies at all, we can reveal different parts of our minds to ourselves. Psychedelic means to reveal the mind. And ancient practitioners from Eastern, tribal, and other forms of indigenous and traditional medicine have been practicing techniques and passing down techniques through oral and written tradition for how to access these powerful states of healing and learning from ourselves for thousands of years. Today, I bring you a conversation with Katie Silcox. Katie is the New York Times bestselling author of the book Healthy, Happy, Sexy: Ayurveda Wisdom for Modern Women. Katie is an internationally recognized teacher, mentor to women, and inspirer of hearts and minds, holding a master's degree in Hinduism and the Ayurveda sciences. After traveling around the world and learning from global wisdom teachers, Katie's professional career has been shaped by her personal journey of healing and self-discovery. We'll talk a lot today about her journey, everything she's learned along the way, and her second book that she just released in 2023 entitled Glow Worthy: Practices for Awakening Your Inner Light and Loving Yourself as You Are, Broken, Beautiful, and Sacred. You're listening to The Psychedelic Report. Katie, it is so good to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us. Could you start by just telling us a little bit about your work and how you got interested in this space?
Yeah. Well, before I got deeply interested in kind of my area of study and practice, which is more the tantric end of both Hinduism, Buddhism, and now more the Christian mystical / Jungian psychology path, I actually worked in artificial intelligence. I started working as a researcher helping to teach computers how to, quote, feel human feelings. And as a really young woman in the tech world, who had absolutely no idea about technology, who was kind of brought in as what they called me, a sacrificial virgin, because I could kind of help these guys elucidate something about the feeling states. I began to see that world wasn't for me. And I started avidly doing meditation, doing yoga, and eventually moved to India and quit that job and really dove deep into particularly the tantric traditions from India, including the Vedic sciences of Ayurveda. And that really led to me to where I am now, which is kind of a more free form approach to working with energy and how working with energy can create different experiences, states of consciousness, both intentionally altered as well as more free form experiences.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Just the idea of feeling and how important it is and how much it's missing in the world of computing and AI. It's a huge challenge to try to make computers feel. We We still have to feel ourselves, right?
Maybe a futile journey. I remember working for this company, and it was really, I say a company, but it was more like this rogue band of researchers with just a lot of tech money, and were given money to kind of do whatever they wanted. And he said, Katie, he was like this big, stern German man. He was like, I'm tired of waiting on the humans to enlighten themselves. We're going to enlighten the machines. And I remember, like, somewhere deep in my body, I thought, this is not the path for any of us. And so it's been really interesting to watch the way both personally my journey has unfolded, but also the way the world is now kind of grappling with our creations. And it makes sense to me that you see a lot of people in the tech world reaching for different methodologies, be it psychedelics or breath work or meditation, mindfulness, these things, because I think there's something deep in us that knows, okay, we better lean into some other parts of our brain and our nervous system than this logical prefrontal sort of obsessive logical place, which is, I love that place. Like, there's nothing wrong with that place, but yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I'm excited to dive into this with you today. So we're talking about psychedelic experiences on this show, and one of the ways that we think about what the word psychedelic really means is mind revealing or mind expanding, and in some cases mind manifesting. And there are ways that we can psyche meaning mind and delos meaning to show or to reveal. And so we have this really interesting concept that applies to not just drugs that help us access these states molecularly, but also to skills and techniques that are in some cases thousands of years old that people have used to naturally access these states and train themselves to access these states for healing and for many other purposes. And you talk a lot about, in your new book, Glowworthy, which just came out, you talk a lot about, I think, endogenous psychedelic experiences, right?
I say endogenous ecstasy, but I'm going to steal that. Now I'm going to talk about endogenous psychedelic experiences. I'm totally taking that. Exactly. That's right.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? Like, what is that? And, what are some ways that people can start to think about getting
Let's
there?
do it. Yeah, right now. So when we hear this, I love your definition, and it's really helped me kind of break some of my own personal stigma around psychedelics, because I've been so steeped in these traditional approaches. Again, not only the Indian system, but multiple disciplines, and the way our ancestors of old have encouraged us to hone the mind. And when I heard your definition of psychedelia, I was like, oh, that's exactly the definition of Tantra. Tan means to expand, and Tra is a methodology for expansion. And of course, we can apply that to anything, but they were speaking primarily about the mind, with this idea that all of us are walking around with limitations. Today, it's really popular to call it limiting beliefs, but the ancients have been calling this karma for a really long time. And samskara, these grooves that form that now we're understanding through neuroscience, like these are these neural pathways that these ancient yogis understood, and certainly ancient mystical traditions writ large. And so that became really interesting to me because I was suffering so much. I knew that because I was also like highly sensitive, that I had to find a methodology that worked for me. And in the tantric tradition, it's said that there are as many poses, there are as many mantras, there are as many methodologies as there are beings. And so each of us has to kind of find this way of finding the psychedelic path for us that works. And you mentioned there are many. So the central premise of Tantra is that we are working with an egoic structure that, by very definition, like one of my favorite definitions of the word ego is the desire to be somewhere else, the get me out of here impulse. That get me out of here impulse creates a constricted structure through which it attempts to validate itself and reify itself, make itself more of itself, while simultaneously getting away from the present moment, which is its mortal enemy. There's a way in which the experience of present moment is somehow threatening to this thing. And yet the thing that we think that will make us feel better is often something external to ourselves. And you and we all have our ways of like getting that external experience. And not that there's anything bad or wrong with that. Like I love watching Judge Judy. It's like my thing. Like, why? I don't know. That's like a deep psychological exploration, right? But like the tantrics understood this just as we now, through your work and through amazing work in neuroscience, understand that that egoic structure is a tiny part of the actual mind. And yet we're wholly identified with it. And so Tantra means a methodology through which I can move beyond that sense of both limitation and isolation, which is like, OMG, so many of our mental states on the planet right now, I feel anxious, depressed, and alone. Another one of its favorite phrases is, this is how it will always be. And the ancients understood that as this wheel of karma, like a hamster on a wheel, that repetitive pattern of the neurology that repeats things over and over and over again. And so Tantra says, how can we step out of that entire structure and step into a vaster system that is actually all around us all the time? And so their answer was, it's your body's energy. And this is the mystical, divine feminine, right? And like, I could geek out and keep going, but maybe I should give pause and let you kind of reflect.
That's so fascinating. I have never heard it explained that way before. And that makes actually an incredible amount of sense with what I've been reading about lately, which is really interesting. And also what we do in therapy with our clients. I want to go back to something you said for a minute before we go deeper, because
Sure.
this is really interesting. This philosophy I've always been fascinated by, but I've never really understood it. So you're really helping me here. So this ego part of ourselves that you described, which is a small part and an important part that is very often dominant in the way we think, and it's just one part of our brains. It seems to be, like you said, trying to get away. Did you mean like it's afraid?
Yes, I mean that exactly. And there are sort of two pathways in Tantra, and that is developmental, and the other is presence. So in the developmental state, we would work with a therapist. We go through our trauma. We talk about our childhood. We work through our issues. And I'm a big fan of all of that. And I do all of that, right? And that would be really working to have a strong sense of self and a strong ego. But then we can remain caught there. And so what that part of us does is it is attempting to avoid the rawness of being in the moment. The moment is raw. The moment is what the tantrics would call the feminine. It's the fundamental life force. It is fundamental energy. And that is anger, and that is fear, and that is sensation, and that is all of the human spectrum of emotions that we feel, from the gross level of the body to the sublime level of the spirit. We are constantly moving through these altered states of experience. And the ego is a little bit terrified of those. And so it's constantly attempting to slip off that spot. And that spot is called present moment, right? And that's what all the great teachers are like. It's enlightenment is just this 1 degree of turning your face to one side. It's actually already here. And the irony and why I love Tantra, it's the great paradox. When you touch that, you're touching the truth. So the thing that we are running from the most is also sitting on top. In the tantric tradition, it says it's sitting on top of God. It's pushing down upon God. This is what Kundalini is. Kundalini means that part of you that is asleep to the fact that you're divine. And the stuff that's sitting on top of the realization of your divinity, which is also physiological, by the way, and we could geek out on that as well. But that physiology, the key to unlocking and opening it is actually, and of course, with mindfulness and often with lots of love and support, going into it, walking right through that door. It's like the ego also is the path in, just as the world is the path in. This is the opposite of attempting to annihilate one's ego or even get out of this sort of miserable, samskaric, suffering world. It's saying, let's actually go in to the world, whether it be my beloved through lovemaking or volunteering at an old folks home, or God, I just got a baby puppy 6 months ago. And that's a tantric journey of impatience and cleaning shit. And, let's actually go in. because by going in, I will continually be made revealed where I am wanting to get away.
And also where we have opportunities for growth.
Absolutely.
You're listening to The Psychedelic Report. Wow. So I'm just amazed at how similar this is to the way that we talk about everything from Apollo to the way we do therapy. It's like everything I'm hearing you say makes sense in the context of people helping the ego feel safe enough to access those states.
That's it. What we call the healing climate.
Right. And we call like the set and setting or the doctor-patient relationship. Or
right.
Any of those.
Trust.
And it's so interesting. So we talk about in psychedelic therapy, like the medicine is a catalyst molecularly to the parts of the brain that seem to be involved in the trust and relationship building part of the experience. Then the part where a client learns to trust us, and then they remember what that trust feels like so that they can trust themselves again. And we start to like role model trust for them. And then you add on the psychedelic medicine, and that like seems to molecularly amplify that sense of safety and trust. And we say like it helps people feel safe enough to be present.
Because sometimes when there's a lot of, we would now in the modern parlance call trauma, we would also refer to that as karma. It can be impossible to stay on the spot of being inside oneself. And I'm glad you brought that up. It's a developmental approach, really, that there are stages, and it's not always as easy as just going right to the heart of your darkness. I think about, there's a Carl Jungian psychologist that says he was asked, and I can't remember his name at the moment, it wasn't Carl Jung, but he was asked, can you please define Jungian psychology, which is just Western Tantra? And he said, everything belongs. And that really blew my mind, because if we take the time to really pause and see the way that we're interfacing with ourselves, what we often find is that we're in this sort of harsh, if not violent relationship. It's an inner warfare that we see then extrapolated externally out into our world. Mm-hmm. And so by ironically opening to the parts of you that you feel the least affinity for, that's actually where that medicine exists. And in the yogic tantra tradition, there are similar methodologies that I would assume activate probably different levels. It might not be as amplified and fast, but in the yogic tradition, we called this soma. And soma was actually considered, and there's a lot of debate around what soma is, but it was basically on a gross level, the word for yogi drugs, right? It was like concoctions they would make out of various substances. Some say mushrooms, some say marijuana, and you can still find remnants of this now. And then
soma also means body, right?
That's exactly right, in the Greek tradition. And so you see these crossovers. But now there's like contentious stuff, even in the yoga and Ayurveda world, there's so much contentious stuff. And it's like, those teachings have died. Like now no one knows what they were. And okay, fair enough. But one of my Ayurveda teachers explained this soma, yes, was a drink that the yogis would take on special nights and go on these journeys. And this is where these, the Hindu pantheon of gods, they surmise may have come from these psychedelic journeys that the yogis were taking. And now we have Krishna and Radha and Lakshmi and Shiva and Brahma and all these gods, right? But Dr. Ladd, one of my Ayurveda teachers, he says, yes, that's one level of soma, but the other levels of soma were considered more advanced practices. And no offense, right? But they were considered more advanced, and you would access them in the subtle portals in the physiology. Now we know them to be pituitary, pineal gland, HPA. That whole axis can be activated through these subtle practices of breath work, where these quote gods would then give you a visitation. And so there are some really sweet practices that we do. I have a school for Ayurvedic medicine called the Shakti School, and we do these subtle practices. And let me tell you, Dave, it's so beautiful, because the first thing that you see, even after 15, 20 minutes of these practices, where you really give people a portal and a channel through their physiology to work with, that is different than just a mindfulness or a meditative approach. It's an actual journey that you're taking through tubes in your body, through tubes that you create essentially with your mind, with your visualization. But the ancients would say they actually exist. I'll give you one example of that subtle anatomy is you have a long tube of prana, of energy, and they call them nadis, but it's fun to say tube. And you go down the back of your body. You just take your mind, you go from the front, they call the third eye of your eyes, and you just draw like an imaginary line, like you have a highlighter to the back of your head. Anybody on the street can do this. I've done this with like truckers from West Virginia. This sounds cuckoo, sounds woo-woo, but then they do. Okay. Highlighter to the back of my head. Now I want you to just imagine you have a big waterfall behind you and it's just dropping down your back over and over and over again. And you can make it any color you want. You can make it any temperature, any pressure. It's just the perfect temperature and pressure for you. And immediately what you start to see is my thoughts come in. I don't want to be in the waterfall. And that's okay. And you come back. And over time, what begins to happen is you are not creating the experience. It begins to be revealed that there's always this downward force that the ancients knew about. They called it a panavayu. Prana going down is gravity, if we want to speak scientifically. So you connect to that. Then you have this dorsal vagal activation, this rest and digest, this social nervous system. And that's a great practice, by the way, for people who don't feel safe in the body. You're behind the body. You're not even in the body. And now there's safety. And then you can start to go down the body. So on and on and on. There are many of these practices that we can do. And each of them can have a different energetic effect. And that's where you can start to kind of be a little bit more intentional with the intended energetic effect you want to create, be it an upper or a downer or a balancer or a heart opener or all these different things. But it really is a science, an inner science.
Yeah, it's really incredible to hear it described this way again, and to think about this, the idea of intention, because what it sounds like you're talking about is we talk about intention being like the focused human energy on something. And attention is like where you're focusing your spotlight and what's coming in, and what you're allowing yourself to listen to. And it's interesting to think about that simple exercise, because you're intentionally drawing your attention to a feeling that you're describing or a part of your body, and just saying, hey, pay attention to this part of your body and think about this feeling. As you do it, you're also getting the benefit of the safety of feeling in control of your attention.
That you have agency in this story. And there were these monks that came, I think they were Thai monks, tantric monks, that came to Berkeley, California. I remember hearing the story from a teacher there, the first impression of people that they met in California were that they were all heads. And, Berkeley is this place of like real incredible knowledge and information, and that whole Bay Area, it very well. And this practice of just dropping down the body, whether it be internally or externally, is getting grounded. It is more than just an imagination or an attention exercise as well. What it does to the physiology is it actually opens up the energy systems that maybe Western science knows a little bit about, but the ancients all agreed in disparate parts of the world that we have these chakras or these energetic centers that do get kind of trampled on and shut down for various vicissitudes, reasons of life, right? And so as you start to access that downward flow, it's like plugging the light into a light socket. Now I have access to something bigger, whether it be my personal auric field, as they would say in the ancient tradition, or that just sense of openness and expandedness. But we're actually changing the physiology as well through interfacing with the reality of the energy body that most of us just weren't taught that we even have. And I think that for me has just been so powerful to know that I am not only this thinking being and this feeling narrative, because now it's like, okay, we're not just thinking beings. Now we're going to enlighten ourselves and be super tuned to our emotions. And that's just not enough, right? Because the emotions are problematic as well if we only identify with them. And so it brings us into this next tier of who am I? right? I'm also this energy body that can, through almost a felt sense and an intuitive sense, actually feel, if given the right amount of time, the tingling sensation in the feet when I do have an intention to drop my awareness down there and into the earth. This is what it means to get grounded. It's actually literal, not just let me do an exercise to make me feel better. It's actually happening. And I think that is what creates an energetic reality of connection that may not even need words, right? You and I, if we sit together long enough and we do a grounding practice, we can just look over at each other and, like the old folks used to do, right? And nod and keep whittling, right? Like there's a sense. I'm blathering on, but that's my thoughts for now.
Going back to psychedelic states, and we're revealing parts of ourselves to us through the practice of presentness, and then that has these downstream effects on the body that are, as you said, increasing vagal tone and effectively like calming the body.
Or
alternatively, you can excite the body too and activate.
Or activating, right? Exactly. Right. Like then you start to wield a sharp sword that goes in all directions. So we all need calming. So let's focus on that for now, because we want to be a medicine for the people of our time. But I want to go back to what you said about the definition of the word psychedelics and the way it means to open and expand that which is unknown in the mind to be known.
Mm-hmm.
That is the actual definition of the word yoga. To make that which was unknown now known.
Wow.
Yeah, it's incredible, right? And humbling. Like that's why I love Carl Jung, and I'm studying him right now, so forgive me referencing it a lot, but
he's great.
Love what he says. He says the ego isn't bad. It needs to be nested within its proper context. And so if I don't understand that I'm an energy body, and I'm an energy being, my ego isn't nested within the context of truth. Now we can expand that nestedness to many dimensions. Obviously, our communities, our friendships, our partnerships, but also our planet. And then we could go beyond that, which I'm sure you have experienced in your journeys, right? Like now you get into the realm that all these traditions speak of the angels and the demons and the spirit world and all of these things that seem super woo-woo. But if you keep expanding the mind, and I use the dream world, which is the most psychedelic experience ever, right? You're getting these downloads of messages from the unconscious, which by nature is what we're doing. We're spelunking ourselves through energy work, through breath work, through the practice I just shared with you. I have a school. We have 600 women in the school this year. So it's like a lot of ladies, and they're from all different backgrounds. And what's so wild is when they do this 10-minute, 12-minute, 20-minute practice, some of them are like seasoned at this stuff, right? Others, they're 80-year-old women that have never done this in their life, or Jenny from Idaho that can't pronounce Ayurveda. I mean, we have everyone. And in that moment, someone who's never had a psychedelic journey in their life will look at you and say, oh my God, a sacred image came to me. And she will describe how it is simultaneously so personal. And I will say to her, and yet so archetypal and universal. Held within its arms are both the personal medicine that the ego needs, as well as the bigger universal meaning that is archetypal that heals the community. And that's the definition of yoga. And so doing these practices with enough humility, because it really does require the softening and this opening,
Mm-hmm.
be able to allow sacred imagery, because that's such a huge part of our psyche is image in the brain, sacred imagery to come through, but also sacred emotion, sensation, and many other things. That's why, I mean, not to geek out and tell you what a fangirl I am, but I love Apollo, right? Because it's just this like subtle vibrational experience of being okay. That someone, and Dave, this is super embarrassing, but I'm like, Dave is in the Apollo telling me it's all going to be okay. When
I kind of am. It is my gift to the world with Catherine.
Well, I believe you. So, that's why I love you guys.
Likewise. And I was gonna ask you, because I remember the first time you put it on and you noticed it right away. And I was curious in the context of what we're talking about here, presentness, allowing ourselves to feel safe enough to like be present, to be vulnerable, to experience and feel without judgment. How does Apollo fit in, and the vibration, fit into that kind of philosophy?
Well, my dear, you've put your little tech finger on the heart of the ancient way of viewing the underlying nature of reality, which is light, sound, and vibration, which I don't have the scientific background to understand, but they're probably all interfacing and maybe even the same thing, right?
Yeah, they're all frequency and vibration.
So you put your finger on it. Like, we want to be cosmically rocked to sleep. That's why the first word of the most ancient religious text on the planet is not a word, it's a sound, and it's Om. And, and it's just that sound. Not to say that is the sound of Apollo, but it kind of is, right? You get this subtle sense of vibration. That what the tantric said is, it's super hard to get the mind to stop. Let's not try. Let's work with the energy, vibration, sound, light, visualization. The Buddhists were the great masters of Tantra. They had the most beautiful, intricate visualizations. You can see these tankas, these mandalas, these beautiful visualizations they would have you do. But they were, moreover, visualizations that came from being in these altered states. And so for us babies on the spiritual path, and in a way for us Zenites on the path, Apollo is just like a very simple return to the deep complexity of what we're all longing for. And I personally have used it where I'll just like even put it on my chest, and I know you have a clip for it now, or on my belly, and it sends a signal to go down, because that's essentially what we're really attempting to get the nervous system to do in our current modern era. Whereas, and we need that, like, look at our technological world. It's all about up and out. You can even see it in the way we hold the screens, and we take our consciousness and we project it out of our body through our eyes onto our screens.
They were so overstimulated.
Super overstimulated. So imagine our foremothers and forefathers of the ancient times who were in a different experience, where they were, if you go to India, you can still see this. They were squatted down on the earth. And so a lot of those initial energy practices, like, were about shooting them up and out of their body, right? That's not as appropriate as much for us these days. And so anything that brings you in and down initially prepares you to be able to take flight.
That's a really nice metaphor.
Thank you. I didn't make it. It was something I read about Tantra. It said, in order for the eagle to fly, it must be first tethered to the ground. I should tattoo that on my arm.
They're going to say on your nose.
Yeah, it's right here.
Right here.
Yeah.
That's so funny. You're listening to The Psychedelic Report. So one of the things we talk about in therapy a lot is this idea of all of us have a masculine and feminine part of ourselves. There's a balance between these parts of ourselves. And oftentimes a lot of our struggles can be because there's an imbalance between those for whatever reason. Maybe one of them is shame, features of one is shamed or something as a kid or whatever, but there's so many reasons why we could, maybe favor one side versus the other. And this isn't really taught that much in the traditional psychotherapy. I think the only time I ever remember really learning about this was in more of my psychedelic training, therapy training. But this idea of having different parts of ourselves and for simplicity's sake, thinking about just a masculine and a feminine energy to start their imbalance. Is that consistent with what the tantric teachings talk about in the yogic teachings, and how does the divine feminine, as you were mentioning earlier, being associated with the present, how does that relate to the healing process? I have a feeling I'm trying to get us towards ecstasy. Right? That's what everybody wants to know.
First step towards getting to ecstasy is to let go of the need for ecstasy. But yeah,
right? The great paradox.
It is. It's like, there's so many places to go. Let's talk for 85 hours on the feminine and masculine. But the short version is, yes, this is the basis of Tantra. And you can see this throughout many Eastern traditions, Greek tradition, many of our lineages have this understanding of an inner feminine and an inner masculine, and it obviously has nothing to do with gender, although we could say that it does as well. There's an argument to be made that it's important, but let's say for now because what we're working towards is called the divine androgen. And in Tantra, it's said, this is the ancient teachings, 3 parts masculine and 2 parts feminine is the quote ideal man. 3 parts feminine, 2 parts masculine. But what's revolutionary about that statement is that at least it makes room for us to be duplicitous, to be androgynous, and to access these hidden potentials. Of course, Carl Jung was famed for speaking of the anima and the animus, and it was written for the time. And so each generation has to update the teaching of what we call Shiva and Shakti, the masculine and the feminine. But there's, again, the developmental level of it. So like, hi, I'm Dave, or hi, I'm Katie, and here's what I'm presenting right now. And here's what I'm going to kind of work on. It's very conceptualized, and it's sort of, there's a lot of sort of ideation around it. That's a little bit more the maturation of the inner feminine and inner masculine from sort of a health or mental health perspective, which is super important and super empowering for people who grew up like, you can only be a football player, like stop crying, right? Like It's super valuable. But on another level, and as we deepen and open into the spiritual journey, we're all really tasked with the journey of maturing the inner feminine and the inner masculine, what we would call the divinization process. So what does that look like practically? If we actually go back to the Sanskrit root words, we can see it. So the root word for the goddess, the divine feminine in Sanskrit is Devi. De is the root. De means, and this is incredible. So get that, right? We all talk about the divine feminine, divine masculine, but go to the roots of the Sanskrit and you'll find the practice. So it leaves the realm of the conceptual left brain. We could also see that the ancients weren't just making shit up. This is left and right brain in humans. And if you read like the work of the master and his emissary, that is Tantra 101, explained from a more scientific point of view. But on a divine level, go to the root word, and the root for the feminine is D, which means light, but it also means space, emptiness. If we think about Buddhism, that's their whole gig, right? The nirvana coming from spaciousness, emptiness. Why they called that the divine feminine is that women do have a womb that is this sort of womb-like open space. And now what happens? The more spaciousness I have, now something can be fecund and creative in that place. And now that divine feminine becomes activated. In some tantric traditions, it's the complete inverse, okay? The masculine is the open field of consciousness, and the feminine is the active, wild principle. And this is like stumping students of yoga and tantra for years, and it's because the yin and the yang symbol, it is meant to have a black dot in the white space and vice versa. These things are fish that eat their own tail. Like the further you go in one direction, the more you get to the other. So call them whatever you want, but within each of us, we have this holy emptiness that needs nothing and no one to be whole and complete, that needs no altered states, that is pure consciousness, pure openness itself, the birthplace of all states and all experiences. And we are multitudinous experiences of infinite variety arising and falling in infinity. Now, get those two together, and that's where you get the holy matrimony. That's the bliss. That's the ecstatic state. The ecstatic state arises out of not needing anything to be different.
To be you.
Exactly. To be you in this moment with whatever is arising in the field of experience. And that can be a brutal ask, but that's human story. And even there are beautiful mythologies that urge us to go on this very awkward and arduous journey, right? You are somewhere halfway between the animals and the gods. Like that's what this really is about. And there's practicalities around it. that I think are interesting to explore. Are you going to go with even your meditation? Are you going to be more, quote, masculine with it? Or are you going to be more feminine with it? And then the ideal is that we would have both, the ability to rest in the openness of infinite being while resisting none of the emotions and the images and the craziness, right? I'm a girl. I'm a girly girl. I have so many feelings, right? To be able to hold all of that, I have to have an incredibly strong inner masculine to hold my own inner wild feminine, much less ask someone else to do it. But we want to outsource it. Like, oh, if I could just meet a man that would hold me.
Right. That's also part of the paradox, right? Is that unless we learn to hold ourselves, it's really, really hard to find somebody who can truly hold us.
And having someone hold you as you do with your people can be
Right.
a portal into knowing that at least it exists.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, your lover is showing you what it would look like to love yourself.
Mm-hmm. And what it would feel like.
That's right.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really interesting way to think about it. And tell me if they think this is off base. Masculine, ego, protector, mostly, and sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight. Female, feminine, safety, presentness. Parasympathetic nervous system, vagal, recovery, calm. And then the goal is balance in general. Most, with give or take a little bit on either side. Is that fair?
I think the model isn't, yes, that works. That works because you've tapped into the duality. You could call it Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire, and you could swap, right? It's more the recognition that within us, we have this dual nature, and it's all the way encoded into our physiology, be it the central nervous system or the way the brain works. We could also think about it as on a spiritual level too, but I love that. Yeah, exactly. And when you say that, the first thing that comes to mind as I'm listening is this really breaks down this whole idea around women having more of that and men not, because so many of the words you used, I've really experienced with men, steady, calm, parasympathetic, even keeled. And I have a school of 600 women, and, there's like an activational quality and it's very sympathetic in some ways to be a woman in our cycles. So I think it can go beyond the male female, but I love the way you broke that down. And, I was listening to one of my teachers the other day, and he was saying the masculine is the conquering and the doing and the achieving. And we can think of it on a societal level. And he said, it's also the quest for conquering because of survival. So that would be that more survival brain. And I love this because beyond women and men, that's what we did for a really long time. And he said, now, once you have your basic survival needs met, you can start to do art and create culture and create beauty. And that's the feminine. And it is rest and openness and digest and chill out and now be creative and enjoyment. And he said our society is locked in the masculine conquering. We have hustle culture. Right? We have lost this idea of what we do actually need for survival. And if we really were tuned to that, survival needs for many of us on the planet are met, we could be experiencing the greatest rise of the feminine on the planet right now in terms of creativity and ideas. And in some ways we are, but in some ways we're not. I know for me personally, technology and economics tend to be that more masculine realm. And what's the other side? It's la belle fa niente, the Italians say, the beautiful do nothing.
Right.
And how much of my personal life am I doing that? Well, I just wrote a new book and I'm in the promo mode, but I long for that feminine.
Yeah, it's really, I think of it also as like men do and women be, right?
Right,
it's
but
like,
we flipped it.
Right.
My mom is like, put on your shoulder pads and get out there and make that money. Like, the women are doing more than ever,
Yeah, it's wild. And I think it's really, it's really inspiring to see just how capable we are of, it really reinforces the fact that we are truly like dynamic creatures capable of of so much adaptation and growth. And I think we often don't give ourselves enough credit for how capable we are of doing stuff, of like transforming ourselves. And, there's so much we could talk about there. But I think this idea of the relationship of these practices you're talking about, which in a lot of ways, I consider the conversation we're having right now to be so interesting because I put a lot of this into like the understanding part of the practices. I think of it almost as like there's like understanding, and then there's getting a basic sense of what the heck is going on underneath the hood there, right? All of the stuff that we're talking about. And then there's the practices, the behavioral stuff, which we're starting to get into. And then there's the feeling, which we're also touching on, no pun intended. And I think this balance is so interesting, right? Because it's like we talk a lot about in therapy how the purpose of our lives, like we spend so much time asking, like, what's the point of life? Like, what's the meaning of life? And in therapy, we talk a lot about, and I think this goes back into ancient traditions as well, but this idea that the whole point of life is to really like discover the point of life, right? Like it's to discover yourself and your own and what you're capable of. And so I often start therapy by asking people to ask yourself, is it possible that what you were told you are capable of in your life is not the complete story? And almost everybody can answer, yeah, because it's possible. And once people think about that and they draw their awareness to that, then all of a sudden they at least start to think about what else might be out there.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. The great expansion. And now let's take it to every level.
You're listening to The Psychedelic Report. It's so interesting too, because we talk about the bridge between science and spirituality, right? And this idea of Kundalini awakening, which I never thought about the way you described it before, is like the recognition that we are inherently divine.
Well, this is where the community has the definitions wrong, and I get emotional about it because I'm like, the Sanskrit's important. I'm a geek. And I'm
Sanskrit is so important. It's fascinating.
And to honor the practice, because Kundalini yoga, and this is a little bit of a nuanced thing, but the nuance makes all the difference in the world for the psyche. So the Kundalini, Kunda means the bowl or the pot, and Lini means she who lives and dwells. And they are referring to the pelvic bowl, literally. Wow. And then you can think psyche as well, like that which rests asleep within this container of mind. So Kundalini means that part of you that is asleep. It means she who's sleeping.
Wow.
So Kundalini is the sleeping part. And the part that when it's awakened, it's actually not called Kundalini at all. Because people are like, oh, my Kundalini is, I'm like, no, your Kundalini is down there and it's asleep. And so the awakened is called Prana Shakti, the power of awakened free-flowing energy. So these techniques slowly, I don't do the crazy Kundalini. We do it very, very slowly. Start to open and unlock those energetic portals, which in the tantric anatomy, you are woven. Physiology is woven into pure animal energy, is woven. If I had one more hand, you could see this, right? Is woven into, get this, memory, story. And in this tradition, it's like, not just this life. Okay. Right. So you've got like these three things hitting one another, spinning around, and that forms the portal of perception through that gateway, be it root chakra, survival, right? Second chakra, sexual energy, and all these different levels of being. And so as I begin to channel my attention through my body, I'm doing a practice the ancients called Laya yoga. Laya means the yoga of dissolving. And what are you dissolving? Through an intention and attention, as you adeptly said it, we say prana energy follows focus, loving. In fact, loving attention. Non-loving attention constricts the prana. Prana cannot flow through tension is one of the core sort of rules. And as it begins to move, it dissolves the narrative. It dissolves the narrative from the physiology through this liquid light of your attention meeting pure fundamental life force. And it has this sort of miraculous dissolving and resolving serum on these well-held patterns. Now, I'm not a scientist, I'm a yogi, but like I am starting to now see through meeting people like you, it's like, wow, all the stuff they knew. But more importantly for me, my own heart is opening. My own perceptions are opening. The traumas and dramas that have plagued me since I was really little start to lose their binding on me.
Yeah, and that's the same thing that we see in therapy, right? Especially in psychedelic therapy when we're working with people in these states. It's like one of my patients described it as like scraping the gunk out of like a grill or like a dirty sink. It was just like getting out the dirt.
We have a word for that in Ayurvedic medicine. It's called ama. It means the gunk on your grill. I mean, it doesn't literally, but and you have physical ama and you have emotional ama and you have psychological ama. And like, and really, if we were going to synthesize it down, and I try to do this in the book, it is awareness and presence, but it's also love. And like, that's the masculine and the feminine. Like, we all know we can pay attention to someone and sear them with our gaze, but if it's not full of love, it doesn't have the same effect. In fact, it feels creepy or judgmental.
So can I ask you a quick question about that? Because I think that's really, really important, because we talk about this all the time also as non-judgmental listening or non-judgmental attention. And so is it just not judging, or is there something else that has to happen?
Ooh, good question. So, I mean, there are different fields of thought. I mean, if you different sects and different ideas of practice, like Buddhism obviously is much more interested in the non-attachment realm, but they all lead back to the same place. And you can even see these statues of the Buddha where he'll have, this is the mudra for knowledge or wisdom. This is the consciousness, this is the masculine. And the Buddha is holding it right in front of his heart. This mudra is called jnana mudra. It means wisdom or knowledge. If you get quiet and still enough, you will attain a very high level of wisdom and knowledge. But he puts it over the heart, because if you get enough wisdom, you're led to the revelation that it is love that is the highest of the wisdom. Similarly, if you keep following the path of love, you begin to become wise. So you can go in either direction. But I do think there's something different and important about love that's less emphasized in most of the traditions I've studied, except for one tradition called Bhakti, which is the path of love. And I'm a Christian. I was born Southern Baptist, and I freaking still love me some Jesus. It's definitely like a tantric witchy Jesus practice, but Jesus is my guy, right? If you just say Jesus, I just like, my heart just opens. And the Christian path in its best form is a path of love. And so there's a great book, I think it's called like What God Does to the Brain. And they've actually shown that Buddhist meditations on emptiness, the pure focus or the pure masculine, do something different physiologically than Christian meditations on a love for a divinity or love for a fatherly or motherly divinity. So they do different things. I think it's important to say these aren't all the same path to ecstasy or enlightenment or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, but it is, and going back to where we started about psychedelic states, it is kind of like the ultimate reveal, right? Because you're training yourself through these practices of feeling, and really it's just like feeling and being present and doing all of the things that we just described. And a lot of it is like understanding that it's just okay to be present, to be you, and to accept yourself and everything as part of the same thing, and being here now. That this has profound physiological ramifications on the body in so many different ways. And it's really neat to think about how long we've known about this stuff, right? Like, this is not new. It's actually been around for so many generations. One of my favorite words, would you mind geeking on with me for 2 more minutes before we wrap?
Yeah, sure. I'd love it.
I would just love for you to tell us a little bit about I might butcher this word, but the word like Sanskrit, Svatya. Is that how you say it?
Svasta.
Svastya in English.
Svastha. Yeah, Svasta. I was like, did Dave just drop a Sanskrit word I'm not going to know?
No, I know. It's my pronunciation, of course.
I'm like, I don't know that one. Tell me, what is this goddess? Svasta is a beautiful word. And by the way, on the note, before I tell you about that one of my favorite Sanskrit goddesses is, I can't remember the full Sanskrit. It's like 27 letters long, but it's she who is never not broken.
Mm.
There's room for that within this word that you bring up called svasta. In Ayurvedic medicine, the word for health is svasta. And you can go, cool, svasta means health, but it doesn't. If you go to the root, you're going to see this, like, talk about psychedelic experience. Then the whole mind can open of the mind of these brilliant ancients. The word sva means, here's like the Katie Silcox translation, it means self, but it means who you really are beyond your age, your race, your gender, your upbringing, all your defense mechanisms, like who you really are. And it's you, it's individual. It's not just the big universal you. It's the individual you. Stha, S-T-H-A, to be standing in, to be stable in, to be situated in. So the word for health isn't your body is the absence of symptomology and disease, as we say in English. It's you are situated in the truth of who you really are. And that makes me cry because I run a school for health and I'm not perfectly healthy. I have my own journey that I'm on, and it just takes the pressure off of all of us to be perfect. There's room in the system for a part of you that's never not broken. And that's what makes us frail and human and vulnerable and like tender and sacred. So yeah, that's a really beautiful word. Thank you for bringing it into the field.
Yeah, I love the way you describe that. I've learned so much from you today. This has been so much fun. I feel like I could talk to you about this stuff for hours.
We're cut from the same cloth. We're just doing different things.
Yeah, it's different approaches to the same thing. You know, I've experienced it through my clients' experiences, through healing, and through my own, breathwork experiences, and in particular, and just hearing it come from you so eloquently, describing healing in a lot of ways from these ancient traditions, kind of putting the pieces together for me is really cool. And it really reifies this idea that the ultimate reveal is that we can do it for ourselves, right? And that it's really about just allowing ourselves to see ourselves for who we are, right? And without judgment, with love.
So easy to say. Yeah, maybe a good place to synthesize all of this and close is, I asked my teacher once if there was a billboard that we could put up that everyone would drive by and it's the classic end of podcast thing. I asked my wise elder teacher this, and she said 2 words: stay open. That's it. That is love.
I love it. Thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you, and where can people find Glowworthy?
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, I loved being here. We have a website, theshaktischool.com. They can also find me at katiesilcox.com. We're all up in the Instagram. And they can find Glowworthy. It's actually for pre-sale right now. It comes out October 3rd, but everywhere you buy books, you can find it online and probably in stores soon.
That is so exciting. And the world really needs these incredible techniques. I can't say that enough. So thank you so much for the work that you do and for taking the time to join me. And I look forward to chatting with you again soon.
We'll have you back in the Shakti School soon too, Dave. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Of course. Thanks for listening to The Psychedelic Report. Visit us at thepsychedelicreport.com. This show is recorded weekly on Clubhouse with a live audience. The Psychedelic Report was brought to you by Apollo Neuroscience and produced by Future Medicine Media. While I am a doctor, I'm not your doctor. So please don't take anything you hear on the Psychedelic Report as personal medical advice, because we don't know you. If you have questions about anything you hear on this show, please consult with your doctor.